Well, Nowhere to Go is one of the last Ealing films, and it's immediately gives you a rather strange impression because it has the MGM logo on it rather than the Rank organisation, because Ealing had moved out. They'd had to sell their studios to the BBC. They didn't have a home, but they still had a brand name. And MGM, British, who had a department in Britain, welcomed them into the fold. And they were going to set up a new programme of Ealing films at MGM, and that was fine until the management at MGM changed, and there was nobody there who was particularly sympathetic to Ealing, and they'd moved out of their home, so people didn't feel very much at home, and they started to get a lot of hassle from MGM management, who turned down a lot of their proposals, and it was the beginning of the end, really. But one of the things they didn't turn down was a crime novel that Ealing had bought, a crime novel by Donald Mackenzie, which kind of ticked the boxes of a traditional Hollywood film, a criminal, a rather elaborate staging of a crime, a jailbreak, criminal on the run, and then justice satisfied at last. It had a kind of recognisable genre structure, and that went ahead. And Balkan entrusted it to a couple of new people. As director, he promoted Seth Holt, who had worked at Ealing for a long time, but hadn't directed. But he followed the traditional Ealing path of you start as an editor, then perhaps you become an associate producer, and then when there's an opening and nobody else seemed to want to make this film, Holt wanted to make it, he was promoted to director.
He'd been a particularly brilliant editor and associate producer. Best brain at Ealing Studios, without any doubt. Not necessarily the best director, but the best brain as a sheer intellect. Seth was remarkable.
And Seth Holt turned out, Balkan might not have expected this, to be a kind of independent-minded Ealing person in the tradition of Robert Hamer, whose brother-in-law he was, and Alexander McKendrick, whose films he'd worked on. He'd edited a couple of McKendrick films. He'd been producer of The Ladykillers. And Holt, having got hold of this property, made the decision, as he put it later, he wanted to make the least Ealing film ever made. Quite a big statement. No sort of moralising to it. Although it's a crime film, it doesn't take the police point of view.
Thank you, Rosa. I'm losing money hand over fist. Can't be just the food. There must be something the matter with me.
Look, I don't need money.
Supposing you're pinched here. How do I come out of it? I've got a record. Harboring an escaped convict, I'd be out of business overnight.
Listen, all I need is somewhere to stay. Anything you do for me, I'll pay you for.
Now or later?
Later, but well.
Was very nervous about directing. He said, "Can you say action?" And I said, "No, come on. Seth, don't be so shy. For God's sake, that's what the director does. He says action and cut. And I'm your assistant, and I can set up everything in sight."
He kept on falling asleep. I don't know where he's drinking. Action, cut. Yeah. Oh yeah. He's only a young man, really. He was Robert Hamer's brother-in-law. But both the girls went on the drink, and that pushed them on a drink. Market, they didn't want much pushing, I must agree.
So it's very sad that his career didn't blossom in the way he should have become a terrific director, you know, like Sandy or one of these other fellas. But he didn't.
Having accepted this film, Seth Holt found an ideal person, really, in the circumstances to work with, which was, again, a fresh writer who was fresh to Ealing, Kenneth Tynan. I don't know how familiar a name he is nowadays, but he was already quite an enfant terrible, quite a provocative, controversial figure. He was a very provocative weekly drama columnist for The Observer, who offended a lot of people and was very pleased to offend them. And Balkan brought him to Ealing, made the imaginative decision to offer him a job as script editor to bring in new blood, new ideas. And Kenneth Tynan, who was quite sympathetic to Ealing, he accepted. Well, it was quite good money, and he had the chance to try to inject new blood within a medium that he was interested in, as well as in drama. And Tynan was quite young at the time. He wasn't 30 yet, but later on he became a very controversial figure, very different from the Ealing norm, very different from Michael Balkan's value.
Ken was a very gifted creature. Always supposed to be rather bitchy and all that as a critic, you know. He was a frightfully good critic. I remember so many of his criticisms in the press, nothing to do with writing original screenplays or anything. He was the one who said of one of the famous actors of the day, he played the king as if in deadly fear that someone would play the ace, which I thought was a very witty thing.
Kenneth Tynan had a very frustrating time at Ealing because he was interested in a number of projects. He was very interested in working with McKendrick, in bringing McKendrick back to Ealing, but McKendrick, I think, realised that there wouldn't be much future for him in Ealing at that time, although he did work with Michael Balkan a bit later on Sammy Going South, quite an ambitious, expensive colour cinemascope film. But Tynan, who was a friend of McKendrick's, couldn't marry him with the Ealing of MGM, and Tynan, helped to develop a number of projects which were turned down or which didn't go very far. And the only two films that he had much input into were Nowhere to Go and a film which was almost a posthumous Ealing film called The Scapegoat.
That's a nice scarf you're wearing.
Yes, it's his.
I know it is. If I was you, the sooner I got rid of it, the better I'd like it.
So Holt does seem to have been left reasonably free once the project had been given the green light, and it felt to be quite a safe one. He was even given a free hand about the music, allowed to choose who he wanted, and he chose a jazz musician, Dizzy Reese, and gave him unorthodox instructions, but Dizzy Reese was not an experienced film composer anyway, so he went along with it, was very happy to do it. He just had his jazz musicians play certain kind of music. Holt showed him told him about the film and told him about the character, and said he seemed to understand it, and he produced music and his band played it. And he didn't do the music to a preset score and please do half a minute here and we want this kind of music. Holt simply recorded the music, and as he put it, he used it as part of the editing process, which was really quite a original and fresh thing to do, and I think it pays off. Certainly one of the interesting things about going back to Nowhere to Go now is that it has the first appearance on film of Maggie Smith, who was, she'd been in a certain amount of theatre and indeed in comedy review, and was interestingly cast in this film as a rather lost young woman who attaches herself to the escaped criminal and gets caught up in a rather sad, downbeat plot which doesn't have any sort of love resolution. I suppose it's very much in the tradition of the Hollywood crime film, where the gangster's girlfriend is left alone when justice takes its course. But she's certainly very striking in it, very nice, understated performance, and you can see how the film was not only a calling card for its director, Seth Holt, who got more work, but that filmmakers soon became interested in Maggie Smith, and her career took off from this smallish part in Nowhere to Go.
All right, Greg. Get out.
If that's the way you want it.
I want you to get in front with me. All right, now let's stop being phony. You don't have to play on my sympathy. You've already got it. I'd have helped you last night at the club if I'd known how. What you've got to decide is if you're going to trust me.
What else can I do?
All right, then that's settled.
Maggie Smith, the famous Maggie Smith, now Dame Maggie, and great actress and a great personality. But in those days, first movie, just a bright girl. And very good actress, of course, as she has been ever since.
Seth Holt always regretted the fact that 20 minutes of his cut was cut out to cut it down to a trim 90 minutes or so, and that helped him to move on from the film, and he did move on from it because he got more work and had an interesting career making genre films and a couple of horror films before his premature death. That it was a bit ahead of its time, and it wasn't what people expected from a British film, what people expected from a Ealing film, or whether it was simply that MGM didn't get behind it because they didn't have much. They weren't anymore in partnership with Ealing. It was put out as on a double bill, bottom half of a double bill, cut by about 20 minutes, and it didn't make much impact. Critics tended to be rather condescending to it. Too clever for its own good, which isn't usually something you can say of an Ealing film or a British film of the time, but that makes it all the more interesting now, I think, as an exercise in style and generic construction.